Welcome to another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today's topic is something that's really been on my mind lately. It's all about leaves.
Leaves.
Yeah, and are they more than just those like solar panels we think
Oh,
of?
yeah.
Like just soaking up sun,
Right.
you know? So you sent over some really cool research. And I have to admit, some of the listener questions got me really thinking about the connections to like quantum physics, the Fibonacci sequence,
Oh, wow.
and even like tuning forks. It's wild stuff.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into this with you. It's funny how we can look at something as simple as a leaf and just,
Right.
take it for granted.
Totally.
But when you really start to think about it, it's like there's this whole world of wonder and complexity just waiting to be discovered.
Oh, absolutely. Well, to set the stage for our deep dive today, you sent over all this research on plant evolution.
Right.
And I have to admit, just reading out the journey from those first single-celled algae to all the amazing plants we see today is pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, it really is. When you think about it, it's like, over millions of years, these simple algae, they transformed, they developed these multicellular structures, and eventually gave rise to the first land plants, like mosses.
Mosses. Now, mosses are fascinating to me. I remember them from biology class, but I never really thought about them as like the pioneers of the plant world.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't even have roots or stems like most plants we see around.
Yeah. You're right. Mosses represent a stage where plants were just beginning to figure out this whole land living thing.
Right.
They didn't have those complex structures, so they had to rely on their entire surface area to absorb water and nutrients directly from their surroundings. Imagine a world where every part of the plant had to be both roots and leaves.
Yeah, talk about multitasking.
Yeah, that's a tough way to make a living.
No kidding. But they figured it out,
Yeah,
right?
they did.
They survived and thrived and evolved even without those fancy roots or leaves.
Yeah.
And that leads us to another cool thing you sent in your research, vascular systems.
Yeah.
What a game changer.
Oh, yeah, that was huge. So vascular systems, you've got the xylem and phloem. They act like these pipes, transporting water and nutrients really efficiently throughout the whole plant. That was a big deal.
Yeah.
That allowed plants to grow taller, compete for sunlight, and just really diversify.
So it's like they finally got their internal plumbing figured out.
Exactly.
Okay, now here's a question for you. If these early land plants were doing just fine without leaves, why bother developing them? It just seems like an extra step, right?
I know, right? Seems like that. But, well, think about it. As more and more plants started colonizing the land, things got a little crowded.
Well,
And the competition for sunlight really intensified.
right.
So the plants that could...
Survival of the fittest. But I'm curious about those first leaves. I mean, they couldn't have just magically appeared overnight.
You're right, it was a gradual process. It started with these little tiny scale-like structures called emanations. They popped up on the stems of early vascular plants. Think of them like bumps or scales.
Okay.
Almost like the plant was like experimenting with different shapes, testing the waters.
Right. So those were like the prototypes.
Exactly.
And did those eventually evolve into the like full-blown leaves we see today?
Well, over time, they got more and more sophisticated. And we see this in the evolution of microphylls. They're small, they have a single vein. You can still find them in plants like club mosses.
Oh, okay.
It's like a living link to those early stages of leaf development. But then came the real breakthrough, megaphylls.
Megaphyll.
Megaphylls.
Okay, now those sound serious. What makes them so special?
They're the larger, more complex leaves that we're used to seeing. They have this whole branching network of veins. And that allows for efficient transport of water and nutrients, like a superhighway system within the leaf.
Wow.
And that network helps to support the leaf structure, allows it to grow bigger, capture even more sunlight.
So it's like this masterpiece of engineering, really.
Yeah, it is.
And all driven by that competition for sunlight. It's fascinating. But here's where your research takes a turn. You've proposed this idea that leaves might be doing more than just passively collecting light.
Right.
Like they might be actively interacting with energy in ways that we don't even fully grasp yet.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and your questions about leaves acting like tuning forks really got me thinking. We're so used to that idea of leaves as solar panels, but what if there's more to it?
Yeah.
What if they're interacting with other forms of energy? And what if their shapes and structures are designed to like capture and channel energy at a level we haven't even begun to understand?
Okay, now that's what I call a deep dive. And speaking of going deep, you mentioned quantum tunneling earlier. Now, I vaguely remember this from physics class, but I never imagined it might be happening in plants.
It might sound strange, but quantum tunneling could play a key role in how plants capture and use energy. So picture this. When sunlight hits a leaf, it creates these excited particles called excitons. They carry energy, and they need to travel to specific spots for photosynthesis. And quantum tunneling might let them bypass obstacles, making the energy transfer super efficient.
Wait, so the energy from sunlight is taking these shortcuts through the leaf,
Yeah.
thanks to quantum mechanics?
Yeah, potentially.
Okay, that's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
But how does the shape of the leaf fit into all of this?
That's the really cool part. Think of it this way. The leaf's shape, its curves, its veins, those spaces in between, they all could be affecting how energy flows at a quantum level. Like, these features are creating these tiny pathways, guiding those excitons to exactly where they need to go.
So the leaf isn't just about surface area. It's about creating the best possible paths for energy to flow.
Yeah, it's like nature's version of a circuit board designed for, like, ultimate efficiency.
Wow. Okay, it's like I'm seeing leaves in a whole new light.
That's what I love about this stuff. It challenges our assumptions, right? And there's so much more to learn. And remember those Fibonacci sequences you mentioned. Maybe we should explore how that mathematical pattern fits into this.
Okay, I'm game. But math's not exactly my forte, so you might have to break this one down for me.
No problem. So the Fibonacci sequence, each number is the sum of the two before it. It's this pattern that shows up everywhere in nature, from seashells to sunflowers. It's all about using space and resources in the most efficient way.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see a connection here. So are you saying that this Fibonacci sequence could be influencing how leaves are shaped and arranged to maximize sunlight?
Exactly. Think about how leaves are arranged on a stem. They often spiral upwards. And that spiral arrangement, it's often based on Fibonacci numbers. It's like plants have figured out how to capture the most sunlight possible, making sure each leaf gets its fair share. They've optimized their energy intake.
Okay, so we're talking about leaves that are like fine-tuned for energy flow at a scale we can barely comprehend. But before we go too far down this quantum rabbit hole, I want to bring it back to your initial idea about leaves acting like tuning forks. That's something I want to unpack a little more.
Yeah, let's do that.
We've been talking about sunlight, quantum tunneling, but what if plants are sensitive to even subtler forms of energy in their environment?
Right.
Maybe that tuning fork analogy is closer to the truth than we realize.
It could be.
So tuning forks, energy fields, bring it on.
All right, let's do it. You know, when we think about how plants interact with their environment, we usually just think about the obvious stuff, right?
Yeah.
Sunlight, water, the nutrients from the soil.
Right.
But what if they're like way more in tune with their surroundings than we realize? What if they're picking up on subtle vibrations, electromagnetic fields, maybe even like cosmic rays?
Now that's getting into some fringe plant science.
Yeah.
But that's what makes this so fun.
Exactly.
Right. We're looking beyond that traditional view of plants as these like passive things.
Right.
To explore the idea that they're so much more dynamic.
Yeah.
And connected to everything around them.
Totally.
So let's dive into this whole like plants as tuning forks idea.
Okay.
What kind of energy are we even talking about here?
Okay, so think about it. We are constantly bathed in this whole spectrum of energy. Like, most of it we can't even perceive with our senses.
Right.
You know, there's electromagnetic fields generated by our devices, by the Earth itself. There are cosmic rays constantly hitting the planet from space.
Wow.
And then there's all these subtle vibrations in the air and the ground.
It's like there's this invisible symphony
Yeah.
of energy constantly happening all around us.
Yeah.
And we're just totally oblivious. But are you saying that plants can actually sense this stuff?
It's possible. What if those intricate shapes, those structures in leaves that we see, the veins, the lobes, even the spaces between them, what if all of that is about more than just capturing sunlight? What if it's about interacting with these subtler forms of energy?
So it's like leaves are these finely tuned antennas picking up specific frequencies in this invisible landscape of energy.
Yeah, like that.
I mean, that's a pretty wild idea, but I have to admit, it's pretty intriguing.
It is.
But wouldn't that mean those empty spaces within a leaf, like the cymatic patterns you talked about earlier, could be playing a role in this too, like how these signals are captured and amplified.
Yeah, exactly. So just like the shape of a satellite dish affects how it receives signals, the structure of a leaf could also be influencing how it interacts with energy fields.
Mm.
And those spaces, those patterns, maybe they're crucial for creating a sort of resonance within the leaf, allowing it to vibrate in harmony with certain frequencies.
I'm picturing those cymatics videos where like you see the sound waves making these amazing patterns in sand or water.
Right.
What if something similar is happening inside the leaf? But instead of sound waves, it's these invisible energy fields shaping the patterns,
Yeah.
guiding the growth and development of the leaf.
That's a great way to think about it. It shows how we often underestimate those invisible forces and how they shape the world around us. Just because we can't see something doesn't mean it's not there.
Okay, I'm officially mind blown.
Yeah.
Let's bring this back down to Earth for a second.
Okay.
If plants are interacting with all this energy, what's the point?
Well, think about evolution.
Wow.
It's all about survival and reproduction, right? So any plant that can capture and use energy efficiently wherever it comes from has a leg up. It can grow faster, produce more seeds, outcompete its neighbors for resources.
Okay, so it's like an evolutionary arms race. But instead of weapons, it's all about developing more sophisticated ways to gather energy.
Yeah, exactly. They're tapping into this whole spectrum of energy that we don't even fully understand yet.
It really makes you rethink our definition of energy and how it flows through living things.
Yeah.
We usually focus on those obvious things like sunlight or food. But what if those subtler forms of energy are playing a role too? What if plants have tapped into those in ways that we haven't even begun to grasp?
Yeah, what if they have?
Okay, this is a whole new way of seeing the plant world. It's like we've been looking at the trees, but missing the entire forest.
But speaking of forests, I was reading something about how trees might communicate with each other.
Right.
Is there a connection between that idea and this whole plants as tuning forks concept?
There might be. We already know plants can communicate through chemical signals.
Yeah.
Like when a tree is attacked by insects, it can release pheromones that warn nearby trees.
Yeah.
But what if those chemical signals are only one part of a much more complex system?
You're thinking they might be using those subtle energy fields too, like to send messages. Maybe it's like a plant internet.
A plant internet?
Yeah. So imagine if the shape and structure of those leaves, those antennae, are also involved in sending and receiving these energy signals. Maybe some shapes are better at spreading pheromones, while others are more sensitive to those changes in electromagnetic fields.
Right.
And those spaces inside the leaf, those cymatic patterns, maybe they're influencing how those signals travel too.
Man, it's mind-boggling to think about all that complexity that could be happening right in front of us.
Yeah.
We've covered so much already, from like plant evolution to quantum mechanics and now this plant communication.
Right?
Before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to make sure we touch on one last thing that you mentioned in your research.
Yeah.
This mathematical equation that could potentially describe how all different types of leaves develop.
Ah, yes. The idea of this one equation that could create different leaf shapes based on different parameters, it's a fascinating concept. It suggests that even the most complex shapes in nature might just come from a set of very simple rules.
I'm definitely intrigued, but you know me.
Yeah.
Math isn't really my thing. So can you break down this equation for me?
Okay, so think about it like this. There's an equation with variables that control things like lobation, how many fingers or lobes a leaf has. Then there's curvature, how much the leaf bends, and then tapering, how it narrows at the tip. And by changing these values, you could create an endless variety of leaf shapes. From the simple blade of grass to like the super complex structure of a fern.
So it's like this master formula for making leaves.
Yeah, something like that.
But how does it relate to everything else we've been talking about? You know, the quantum stuff, the energy fields, the Fibonacci sequences. Is all of that like already baked into this equation?
That's the cool part. The equation itself doesn't explicitly include those factors,
Oh, okay.
but it shows a really important principle. Even the most complex forms in nature can come from a few basic underlying rules.
Okay, so let's use an analogy.
Okay.
I get analogies.
Okay, so think of it like baking a cake.
Okay, now you're speaking my language.
All right, perfect. So the equation is like the recipe. It has the ingredients, the instructions, the steps. But what you end up with, the taste, the texture, how the cake looks, depends on all these other things, right?
Right.
The quality of the ingredients, the oven temperature, even how you mix the batter.
So you're saying the equation is like the blueprint for a leaf.
Yeah.
But how that blueprint actually plays out, the unique shape, the structure, that's all influenced by other factors.
Exactly. And those factors could include those energy fields we've been talking about,
Right.
the quantum interactions, even the Fibonacci sequence guiding the arrangement of the veins and lobes. It's the combination of all of that that creates this incredible diversity in the plant world.
This has been quite a journey. I mean, we've gone for the very beginnings of plant evolution to like the quantum realm
Yeah.
and even beyond. And the crazy thing is, I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
That's the beauty of science. It's this endless exploration. And the more we learn, the more we realize how much we still don't know. That's what keeps us asking questions.
Well said. I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today. We've challenged some assumptions, explored some new ideas, and hopefully ignited a sense of wonder about this hidden world of plants. But before we go, I have one more question for you.
Okay, I'm ready.
If plants are tapping into this broader spectrum of energy, if they're communicating in ways we don't fully understand, what can we learn from them? Are there lessons here for us, for our technology, even for how we interact with the natural world?
It really is a profound question,
Mhm.
and it's one that I think drives a lot of scientific exploration. If plants have evolved these incredible ways of interacting with energy and information, what can we learn from them? What can we, maybe even borrow from their designs?
I keep thinking about those solar panels we were talking about earlier.
Hmm.
Like, what if we could design solar panels that actually mimic the structure of a leaf?
Yeah.
Not just to capture sunlight, but to work with those subtler forms of energy, too.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Imagine solar panels that are like antenna, drawing energy from all these different sources, make them even more efficient and sustainable.
Right. And it's not just about energy either. What about communication? If plants are using those energy fields and those chemical signals to build these complex communication networks, could we tap into that?
Mm.
Could we learn to talk to plants, understand their needs, maybe even gain some wisdom from them?
It sounds a little crazy, right?
Yeah.
Like science fiction.
Right.
But I think it's possible. We've already seen how technology can connect us to other species. I mean, look at the devices that help people who've lost their voices to communicate,
Right.
or those prosthetic limbs controlled by thought. If we can achieve that kind of connection with technology, why not with nature?
It is a humbling thought,
Mm.
realizing how much we could learn from the organisms we often just take for granted. This brings me back to that unifying equation for leaf shapes we were talking about. If we could understand the code behind how leaves develop, could we use that knowledge to design better structures, more resilient materials, maybe even whole new technologies inspired by nature?
Definitely. Biomimicry is already this huge field where we look to nature for inspiration to solve problems. We see it everywhere. Buildings designed like termite mounds to stay cool,
Yeah.
airplanes with wings based on bird wings. Understanding how leaves develop could lead to a whole new wave of innovation.
It's incredible to think about. We have this vast library of knowledge just sitting there, encoded in the shapes and patterns of the natural world. We just have to figure out how to read it.
Exactly.
And to do that, we need to change our perspective, to look at the world with that sense of wonder and curiosity, to ask those questions that challenge what we think we know.
And to remember that we're not separate from nature, we're part of it. We've evolved alongside these organisms for millions of years. There's this deep connection there that we're just starting to understand.
So, to our listeners, as we wrap up our deep dive into the fascinating world of leaves, I want to leave you with a little challenge. The next time you see a leaf, take a moment to really look at it.
Yeah.
Appreciate the intricate beauty, the design, and the incredible journey that brought it into being.
And ask yourself, what secrets does it hold? What can we learn from its resilience, its adaptability, how it thrives in this constantly changing world?
This has been an amazing exploration, and I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden world of plants. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep that sense of wonder alive.